So let us put ourselves in the presence of God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, our Father, fountain and origin of all wisdom, you made the Bishop, Saint Albert, great in harmonizing human wisdom. With divine faith, grant, we beseech you, that adhering to his magisterial teaching, and through the advance of the sciences, we may come to a deeper knowledge and love of you, per essentiam ad Dominum. We ask the Blessed Mother Mary to intercede on our behalf, to bring us closer to her Son Jesus, along with Saint Albert the Great, our patron saint. Amen. Saint Albert the Great, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Good morning. Uh, can everybody hear me? Or okay. So thank you very much for to the Department of Chemistry for sponsoring this third installment of the webinar lecture series, no, for academic year 2020 it is very nice that we have a topic now that will be dealing not really with a very technical aspect of chemistry. We've been hearing the lectures before that dealt with very specific topics in the field of chemistry that deal mostly with the research aspect. But now we have our speaker, Dr. Mavreen Tuvilla, from the US, from Texas State University, to share with us something dealing with chemistry education. Something that the university and the College of Science in particular, would like to increase emphasis on, because we believe that in order for the future generations to be inspired to take a career in chemistry, we have to make sure that the way that um, chemistry is taught in schools, in basic ed, in high schools, and of course even in the university, in the tertiary level, would be to a certain level, and then is also based, on research developments that are of course done in the field. So we welcome very much this topic for this morning's lecture, at least for the Philippines, no, our this morning's lecture. And we do hope that our dear faculty members and students attending this webinar would learn a lot from our speaker. For our faculty members, this is the first of two webinars that you are invited to attend for today. Of course, this is the first, and then the second one, which will immediately happen after, would be dealing with the integration of service learning into some select courses in the chemistry program. Um, and so I think these two are intertwined and interlinked. Our efforts to introduce chemistry education research, and our efforts, to put community service as part of some select courses that we will be offering under the chemistry curriculum. So I'd like to congratulate the organizers of this event, particularly the members of the Department of Chemistry. For our students here in the audience, I know some of you still have some jet lag from your prelims exams, but thank you nonetheless for attending this webinar. I'm sure our speaker would really give it her all in order for you to learn something that will be additional knowledge and would also help inspire you as you proceed with your careers in chemistry. So with that, maraming salamat sa inyong lahat and enjoy this morning's webinar.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today. And I am thankful that she accepted our invitation to impart her knowledge to our students, faculties, and also to our guests in today's webinar. Now, the our speaker is a graduate of BS Chemistry, magna cum laude of the University of San Carlos, Cebu, and also had her master's degree at the Texas A&M University, College Station, Texas, USA, and had her PhD in chemistry also in the US in Purdue University, West Lafayette. Uh, and her dissertation is on multimodal analysis of minoritized learners' science engagement in an after-school science program. And she is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Texas State University. And she is currently doing a project on creating faculty student communities for culturally relevant institutional change. Now, as a postdoctoral research associate, she is a program programmatic postdoc of the STEM communities project, and her role is to enact and manage the programmatic aspects of the project. Here is she has a lot of research going on and a lot to mention on analysis of the an evaluation survey and designing professional development and several workshop and trainings that she handled for the recent uh, years. I am glad and thankful for the acceptance of our speaker and our speaker for today. Let me uh, ask everyone to give her a virtual clap. Dr. Mavreen Rose S. Tuvilla, PhD. Thank you so much, Mavreen. Mavreen, you're still on mute.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen? Can you see
Yes,
my share? Okay. So thank you so much for that. It's my turn to speak now, right?
yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I know it's very early, so thank you to and good morning to the students and faculty of University of Santo Tomas. And I guess I'll just get started. Um, so Before I proceed with my objectives for today, I know Sir Darm already gave me an outstanding introduction, but I wanted to give you a little bit more information about me, just to give you some context. So I went to Philippine Science High School, Western Visayas campus. I always had a fascination for the physical sciences. So at the onset, it was either physics or chemistry for me. I finished my bachelor's in chemistry at the University of San Carlos, and while reviewing for the board examinations, I taught as an assistant instructor at the chemistry department. And then I made a detour to work as an assistant manager at BPI, but my first love has always been chemistry. So I was taking some classes at the University of the Philippines, and I had to take a boat to go to Iloilo from Negros every weekend. Um, I then decided to pursue my master's at Texas A&M University, where I analyzed the changes in protein conformations using mass spectrometry. And then after that, I taught K through 12 chemistry in Arizona. And so that was when I started to wonder like about pedagogy and better chemistry instruction. And I then heard of chemistry education. That was the first time I ever heard that there's such a field called chemistry education. And so I pursued my PhD at Purdue University. And the reason for that choice is that Purdue University was actually the pioneer in terms of offering a graduate program in chemistry education. And unlike other discipline based education research. So, a lot of the discipline based education research. They are housed in the College of Education. But for chemistry education, this is actually housed in the Department of Chemistry. So, my PhD is really a PhD in chemistry. And during that time, my dissertation work really focused on students' multimodal science engagement, which I will talk a little bit about later. So currently, I am a postdoctoral researcher at Texas State, where I work for the faculty STEM Communities Project. So in the past year, I've been working closely with faculty and just supporting them to becoming more culturally responsive instructors as part of the 5-year project on institutional transformation. Um, so I wanted to tell you this because I wanted to explain to you that a lot of the things that I will talk about today applies mostly to the US context. But I still want to emphasize that context matters a lot. And while there are things that we can learn from this US perspectives, the challenge I pose to you is what can we take from this talk that we can apply to your own context, meaning the Philippine context, meaning University of Santo Tomas context, meaning your local context. So here is my ambitious list of goals for this webinar, and I hope I'll be able to get through all the parts of it. But my hope is that at the end of this talk, all of us will have some understanding, better understanding of what chemistry education research looks like. So I will start with a brief history of chemistry education research, a survey on the chemistry education research trends, and a sampling of some qualitative research design principles, and finally, the possibilities of K through 12 chemistry education research in the Philippines. The last part is actually aimed more towards sparking a conversation on what can be done in the Philippine setting. And really, this is more of this was my proposal actually when I was in graduate school. When I thought of what research I can do in my hometown of Talisay Negros Occidental. So without further ado, let's get started. So before we even talk about chemistry education research, it would be good to have an understanding of its roots. So in the United States, college chemistry courses have been taught since 1795, but it didn't look like the way it does now. So what was offered was mostly like one general chemistry course where you learn the basics. However, because of the agricultural and industrial boom, meaning there was a need for practical applications, so they then expanded offering more chemistry courses. Was it good teaching? Probably not. So there was a lot of focus on practical applications. It was like an apprenticeship model. So it really was mostly descriptive, and people learned skills, like they know how to do things, but they didn't really, like, probably didn't understand the science behind it. The objective was to know how to do certain things. That was it. And teachers taught through personal empiricism. And what that means is that teaching was mainly um, out of gut feel, so more teacher centered. So then came the introduction of Piagetian constructivism. So because of the experiments Piaget did with children, then they started to think, oh, how are students learning? So in the context of chemistry education, Robert Karplus, a theoretical physicist, is recorded to have conducted one of the pioneering works on chemistry education research with elementary students. So one of the things that he asked was, how much background must children accumulate, how much background knowledge must children accumulate before an explanation makes sense to them? So from like this whole entire time of just like teaching by gut feel, they started to think, oh, what what knowledge do my students actually bring? So then this line of thinking gets further developed as chemistry education research gets applied to college instruction. So this may seem funny, but at that time it was quite a novel idea when Beryl Craig suggested that teaching would be improved if the teacher would spend time with students, find out what they understood about the concepts they were studying. So this like whole like kind of like I guess decades and decades of chem education, this was kind of like, oh, really novel to think about, oh, what are the students understanding? But then teaching has evolved since then with the rediscovery of Vygotsky's ideas that um, in some ways directed educators to think about the other influences that affect student learning. So now we are rediscovering Vygotsky's ideas that knowledge is shaped by micro and macro cultural influences. So these that evolves through increasing participation within communities of practice. What does that mean? It just means that learning is more than just like something that you do on your own. So a lot of other factors go into that learning: your environment, the people that you interact with, and so on. Um, Finally, we are now in the age of meaningful learning, where we acknowledge that students actually have prior knowledge. They don't come to us as blank slates. And whatever new things we teach students, they must be relevant to their prior knowledge. And that students must choose to make those connections. I would even venture to say that we are now really stepping away from our archaic views of teaching. The factory model that applied during the Industrial Revolution cannot work successfully today with all of the technological advancements and intense globalization. So I suppose this is one way to kind of tell that story. However, another way to tell it is that chemistry education research is an offshoot of science education research. So in May 1963, the first issue of the Journal of Research in Science Teaching was published with the goal of increasing emphasis on research in science teaching. Soon after, publications that are on the border of science education research and chemistry education research started to appear. So chemistry education research started to become more of its own thing because of two shifts. First, the shift towards research on students of more advanced courses, which go hand in hand with the shift of who does the chemistry education research. So before, chem ed research was mostly done by the faculty from the College of Education. And now research was being carried out by chemistry faculty or faculty who have appointment in the chemistry department. And then soon after, around 1980, the chemistry education research graduate program was established at Purdue University. Dr. George Wadner was the one who instituted it. I am very proud to say that he was my dissertation co-chair during my stay at Purdue University. And he recently passed, and his absence is keenly felt in the chemistry education world. So now I think we're ready. So what is chemistry education research? It is research that is concerned with teaching and learning in chemistry, um, investigated through a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods. So quantitative methods you've probably heard of, like surveys, pre-test and post-test. And qualitative is something that I will talk a little more on later in this talk. So CER, or chemistry education research, explores a broad range of ideas. So It explores mechanisms by which students construct understanding of chemistry principles and their challenges that impede the construction of those understanding. So it also explores the development of instruments. So these are instruments that measure the understanding, attitudes, identity, and other affective constructs such as motivation, persistence. Um, it also explores how evidence about student learning can be incorporated into curriculum design and how to measure the impact of these curriculum transformations. So now we've come to this part. You probably like were wondering, so how is this different from chemistry? Like you've noticed that the main difference would be that the systems being studied are very different. So with chemistry education research, we focus on people rather than atoms and molecules. And therefore, our research is subject to the great variations in human behavior. So in a lot of ways, the theories that guide the research and the methodologies and the data collection instruments are very different from your traditional chemistry research. So now let me shift gears in since the objective is to kind of show you like a view of what chemistry education research looks like. So here I'm going to show you next the chemistry education research trends. So in a review paper which looked at 10 years of CER and evaluated 650 academic papers, here are the common categories that most chemistry education research fall under. And we're going to look at each, some of the themes of each one. If you noticed, the studies on learning, focusing on students and teachers' conception and conceptual change, take up like the biggest portion, followed by teaching and learning focus on classroom context and learners' characteristics. Some of the themes that fall under this are learners' alternative conceptions or misconception studies. So 50% of the studies that fall under learning is all about um, misconception studies. And then all the rest fall under like approaches used to solve chemistry questions, difficulties in learning specific topics, instruments used to diagnose, address and change conceptions, and the learning progressions of students in specific chemistry topics. And the topics vary like widely. So next category is teaching, and under this, it's just examining various pedagogies. So here are some of the examples of the pedagogies that are commonly evaluated in this kind of research. So one is peer-led team learning, which means it's just basically student teaching, peer mentoring, cooperative learning, and so on and so forth. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is about learning, focusing on classroom contexts and learner characteristics. So these are studies that look at attitudes and beliefs of participants, and these are like the students that you work with. Cognitive variables in participants, which means you're looking at kind of like the different ways some participants, I guess, vary in how they learn things. So learning approaches, the factors affecting their chemistry performance, classroom interaction and classroom environment. I guess you will see this more later because this was actually the work that I did mostly. I looked at classroom interactions and classroom environment. As for research methods, I mentioned earlier that there's qualitative and quantitative methods, and there's also mixed methods, which is just a mix of the qualitative and quantitative methods. So as you can see, this is kind of the trend. I think there's like preference more towards having mixed methods. In terms of the level of study of participants, there's a lot more studies now in higher education. This was definitely not the trend like years ago. If you noticed earlier, like kind of chem ed started with actually talking about like elementary, I guess, science, and now we have a lot more for chemistry education tackling higher education issues. So now, what do I see as opportunities for research? And maybe this could like give you like seeds to think about. So most of the studies focused on higher education 100 level courses. 100 level courses meaning these are introductory courses, general chemistry courses. So there is a need for studies on upper level courses and postgraduates in chemistry. There are very few studies that address misconceptions. So you saw there's like 50% of the studies like talking about, oh, what are students getting wrong, but there's very few studies actually addressing, so how do we like address those misconceptions. So there's actually a need for some of those learning strategies to be evaluated, because a lot of those studies actually like just focus to like few studies and so on, and then it's short term. So some of those learning strategies really need to be evaluated for effectiveness and sustainability of use. And finally, there are fewer studies on how age, race, gender, culture, ethnicity affect teaching and learning. So there is a push now to diverge from treating participants as homogeneous groups, because like from the earlier from like Vygotsky's thinking about all the micro and the macro affecting how students learn. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about qualitative research designs in chemistry education research. So let's start off with something that is familiar. So most of us know the scientific method. We make a hypothesis. We make a hypothesis based on theory. We design an experiment to test that hypothesis. We then gather data by manipulating variables. So we have a control, and then there are variables that we kind of change around. We analyze the results, and then we revise the theory, then make a new theory, and then so on and so forth. So we go this like we do this over and over. Most of the experiments we do in the chemistry lab fall in this kind of research design or experimental design. But and a lot of the things we do in the lab fall into quantifying things. Like in analytical chemistry, we try to quantify things. But in terms of education research, all of you are probably familiar with surveys, doing pre and post tests, and doing some statistical analysis. That's as far as experimental design. But what about these questions? How has COVID-19 affected student engagement? What academic supports do students need during pandemic? What is the importance of laboratory demonstrations? How important are group learning activities? These kinds of questions, we cannot do an experimental design where we manipulate one variable and hold others constant. Like, how could you do that? Like with the pandemic, like, oh, one year we are going to test, like, oh, when there's the pandemic happening and so on. So these questions are better addressed with a different kind of design. So the point I'm trying to make is simple. I'm not trying to debate which method is more powerful to use. Quantitative methods have their own use, and so do qualitative methods. But the bottom line remains: the research design must be appropriate for the research questions. So let's now delve a little bit more on qualitative research design. So when we do experimental design, often we do random sampling so we don't bias our results. But as we earlier, the questions we ask when we use qualitative research design do not fall neatly under things we can experiment on. So in this case, we need to embrace subjectivity. That's really not much different than what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle suggests. That what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. What do we mean by that? We are kind of limited of the instrument that we're like measuring something in. But in this case, you as the researcher is the instrument. So in qualitative research, instead of random sampling, we do purposeful sampling. And our goal is to generate thick description. So we collect the data that would provide us the richest information. What does that mean? If we want to know why students, for example, drop out from organic chemistry, we don't just randomly sample students that are enrolled in organic chemistry. Purposeful sampling would require us to collect data from students who maybe have dropped out or at the greatest risk of dropping. So another key principle in qualitative research design is the goal of attaining an emic perspective. And what that just means is like obtaining an insider's perspective, so an understanding of what the phenomena is going on. So some of the common methods in qualitative research design to collect data are interviews, observations, document analysis. Now, qualitative research traditions. This is not in any way, shape, or form comprehensive. There is a lot of qualitative research traditions, but here are, I would say, like the common ones. So you have case studies, which are detailed examination of an individual case. So you probably choose some participants and like you analyze each one. There's the phenomenology, which is looking at phenomena. So you're trying to understand the direct experiences of participants in a given context and the value those experiences have for the participants. For an example would be, how do pre-service chemistry teachers conceptualize chemistry learning and teaching during their undergraduate experience? So we're trying to understand their experience of their conceptualization of the learning. And then there's ethnography, and this is what I am more I guess like this is what I have spent like years on doing. So it's understanding the culture of a given context. And when I say culture, this is not limited to, oh, Filipino culture, American culture. No, it could be the whole culture of a classroom and what that entails. So you're talking about, how do students interact with one another? How do teachers interact with them? Like, what are the ways that you kind of feel you're a member of a certain group, and so on and so forth. And then there is grounded theory, which just means that you do like constant analysis, like coding and making categories with the aim of like trying to kind of test the cases against one another. So to kind of illustrate that, I'm gonna just briefly show you a little glimpse of my dissertation work. So my dissertation, I worked with resettled Burmese refugee youth, and they are multilingual learners. So these are learners who speak a multitude of Burmese ethnic languages, and we're also learning English. So one of the things that is happening, at least in like the US setting, is that English language learners or multilingual learners, their scientific contributions once they're in the classroom are often rendered invisible, because teachers are only kind of prompted to look at their science ideas when they're articulated in English. And so I was trying to make an argument that when we communicate, we don't just use our language. We also use a lot of other ways, which I call multimodality. So we communicate through our gestures, through how we position ourselves, through how our gaze, through the use of like illustrations and all sorts of other things beyond language. So in my work, we had an after school program, and I collected data from there to look at how they use multimodality when they're engaging in the science content, which our topic was climate change, and what kind of resources they were drawing on that affords them productive science engagement. And when I talk about productive science engagement, what kind of drives those discussion to kind of help them reach their learning goals. So these are the frameworks that I used when I did my dissertation. I collected a lot of video recordings. Screencast means I'm capturing what the students are seeing in their laptops when we're doing some activity. Audio recordings, some field notes. So these are just notes that I take when I'm in the research site. Participant generated artifacts. So this could be some copies of what they were working on that day, the videos that they're making, and so on. And I also collected interviews. So I did like microethnography, which is just like a smaller scale of ethnography. And I did multimodal interactional analysis, which involved a lot of video analysis and multimodal, excuse me, transcription. And what that means is like I was looking at what they're saying, so I would transcribe them, and also kind of noting like what their gestures are, how they position themselves to one another, and so on. And my analytical framework was multimodal critical discourse analysis, which is just kind of understanding what the intent was in all of those things. So this is like kind of a little illustration of my um, data site. So it was one classroom, and this was where I situated the camera and the microphone. And my analytical process really involved like coding the data, looking at it iteratively with some of my research group members and then doing it over and over. To kind of just briefly illustrate, um, here is a log that I wrote. So here's like a segment of what they're doing. And I would like transcribe like what is happening in this moment and trying to kind of understand what the science learning that is going on. I created this multi-layer videos to kind of see the two different angles. So you can kind of see this is their interaction between the three of them, and you can see the other angle too. From this, like here's an example of a finding. Like I said, I will just briefly talk about it. So one of the things that I noticed was that when they coordinated space, it allows for collaborative work. So it requires learners to kind of step in and step back at certain times of the discussion. And so for me, like this kind of learning structure really allows learners to have more opportunities to engage in the learning tasks. And here's the last part, and I'm well aware of the time. Um, so I call this project Talisay, Talisay being my hometown. And this was really from my proposal that I had written for when I was asked what kind of research would I want to do in my hometown. So this is teachers advocating for learning innovations and science advancement of the youth. So this is kind of like the overview of the study, and like the thinking that went to into it was that this idea at that time K through 12 is just being introduced, and then I noticed that from the literature search that I did as well, a lot of the K through 12 teachers are feel unprepared to teach their students. So what happens is when they are being taught some chemistry concepts, a lot of those chemistry concepts get skipped because the teachers do not feel comfortable to teach those concepts. And so one of the things that came out from that search was that usually the textbook becomes kind of the authority in the classroom. So whatever's in the textbook, that's what is being taught. But then I did just a cursory review of the depth ed science curriculum materials and found that there was a lot of inconsistency. Like the quality was kind of all over the place. So like my idea was thinking that we could evaluate the science teaching guide and learners materials and provide recommendations for revisions. Then maybe do an ethnographic study. So kind of trying to understand what the actual classroom practices are in like the public high schools that I was thinking as my study site. And then like moving on later to trying to organize like a professional learning community amongst the teachers to kind of build their own educative curriculum materials. And what that means is that these are materials that's just not targeting only student learning, but teacher learning. So there is this understanding of, okay, how do I use this curriculum? Giving teachers like building their capacity as to how they could like, I guess, use the curriculum for their own purposes, and then do another iteration of it to refine those curricular materials, and then finally to propagate the use of it. So this was kind of like what I was like thinking, and yeah, this was my little plan to like doing the rubric development and like doing the evaluation, um, from like going through the school and doing student interviews, teacher background interviews, classroom observations, and organizing the professional learning community, and like doing a lesson study, which means like teachers will be meeting like maybe bi-weekly or something like that, and like kind of trying to put changes in their teaching and trying to see what the impacts are, and then trying to expand it to other design. So with that, like thank you for the time, and I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Mavreen. And I hope this will help everyone to fully understand what is actually education research na rin to, Mavreen. No? It's not just chemistry, but this can be applied in all disciplines in science. So we are now in open forum. Aldrin, would you care to help me in getting some feedbacks from the chat and also in the FB page? I believe we have a lot of participants now in the FB page. There might be some questions there. And also feel free to open mic, introduce yourself for your questions. We have now here Ma'am Christina Binag. Ma'am Tina, good morning. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Darm. Good morning, Marvin.
Morning.
Tina Binag here. I'm happy with your presentation of your dissertation for Burmese science students, right?
Burmese, yes,
Yeah.
Burmese refugee youth.
All right. Um, but would there be any other unique finding or findings that you had for this Burmese science students?
Oh
Like
yes, there
coordinating
were.
space would be very common to any learners. So would there be
Mhm.
any unique findings for that? Thank you.
Oh yeah, we I of course there that was just like a kind of a brief glimpse of the learnings of that. So one of the things that we found was like really that culturally relevant teaching is very important. What I mean by this is that a lot of the learners don't really get a space to talk about some of their cultural practices that actually have like some scientific backing. Because, so once again, this is in the US context. Um, the US context is attuned to kind of just giving sort of mainstream examples. I've also like talked to teachers and some of their comments were like, I try to give my students experiences. But I think one of my findings is that no, students actually do have experiences, and it is kind of on us to kind of like elicit those experiences to make those science connections. So some of the things that like for at least particularly with the Burmese students, their practice, so like we talked about like climate change. They had a way of and they're resettled refugee youth, so their experiences of living in multiple countries, of how they've experienced weather, actually gave them a whole lot of insight, like that they could comment on things like humidity. Like, so this is something that I learned like personally, like I never understood the concept of humidity until I lived in different places. And what do I mean by that? We have this word in Hiligaynon, ginot, and that actually means like humid. But I always only associated humidity to temperature. So I always thought that when it is humid, it should be hot. But that's not necessarily the case, because you could go into places where it's humid, but it's not hot. So kind of like those science connections, those came up in the study. Other things like in terms of comfortability, as like in their like, so a lot of the students are English language learners, and so when you actually ask them to kind of like put in other modes beyond the language what they know, you will realize that they know a whole lot more. So I think it's like it's very unfair for teachers to kind of assume that the learners do not know things, when in fact if you kind of like delve deeper, they do know those things, but they are unable to articulate it because the language of the classroom was just solely in English. So if you have them do use other modes, like maybe they create like a video or they're asked to draw things, then you can kind of like nuance whatever they're learning. So some of those things, and of course that's not like all of it.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mavreen.
Okay.
I have a question,
Uh,
Chair.
yes, go ahead,
You said
Aldrin.
a while ago regarding meaningful learning. So this is my question. So how do we integrate or measure students' meaningful learning in the laboratory setup? And particularly currently, we have the virtual lab setup. So how do we measure their meaningful learning?
I don't know if I'm the authority to kind of like answer this, because I have very limited like research in terms of like laboratories. But from what I know of like the research is that um, having small group or like discussions, like doing a lot more group work where students are actually teaching one another is one way to kind of like facilitate that learning. Like it's really important to give opportunity. So it's like kind of the way we've always been taught is like, okay, the teacher is like always a transmissive kind of model wherein the teacher kind of like you like one direction, like I'm gonna tell you, I'm going to dump all of these facts to you. And then when you regurgitate to me the facts that I gave to you, then that's learning. That's a very limited view in terms of learning. But like when we talk about like meaningful learning, we're like actually thinking that students are able to make certain connections. And one way to do that is actually have them teach one another. Like have them like I guess expand more in terms of like how is this relevant to me, so finding those kind of relevant moments. um yeah, that's the extent of my answer. I hope at least that's a little bit helpful.
Thank you, Doc Mavreen.
Okay. Okay, Mavreen, I have some. I don't know if pardon me about with my question. If I'm going to do education research or chemistry education research, and my objective will be I want to know if the effectivity of a blended learning versus a face-to-face meeting with students. Uh, if there's a difference, or is there are there any
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
disadvantages? What will be the perfect model, or a good model for this?
I wouldn't say this is a perfect model because, like I said earlier, people have different approaches to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can kind of give you, I guess, like options of what people have done if they want to do this kind of work. Some of them would probably do the quantitative route, and that is to kind of like probably give surveys to like two different set of students. So one who are doing the blended learning and one who are doing the face to face. That's one way to go about it and kind of seeing the differences there. Another way to go about it is going the qualitative route, which I think would entail maybe doing focus groups, because there would be different dynamics if you do focus groups maybe, or interview. Or we can also do a different approach, which is just like trying to like do some ethnography, which is observing what is happening um, in like a blended learning mode and face-to-face mode. So that entails like going to the classroom and making observations. So, or a mix of however kind of depth you want to go one route or the other. Or even you can do all of that. So it really depends on kind of like, I guess, what your purposes are for doing that kind of work. Like, are you trying to kind of restructure maybe curriculum? Are you trying to kind of like evaluate teaching practices or student practices? So it really depends on the focus. So those are the kind of like, I guess, ways or approaches that you could approach a problem. So
Thanks so much, and I hope our listeners and also the faculty members now have a brief idea on how to start a research in education, which is very, I think, that is a new avenue for us to do some research in education, no, especially in chemistry.
there
Yes,
is a lot
uh
of opportunities
huh,
because like in terms like I didn't show one graph, but
mm-hmm,
there's like very few chemistry education research coming from Asia. So I think
yeah,
people would want to hear about that if you want to publish it in a journal at some point.
yeah,
People would want to hear perspectives from like I don't know, like the developing world. How like because I know that the teachers also like we are in a developing world. We have some limited resources, but teachers have been doing all sorts of strategies to kind of increase student engagement
exactly,
um, in science. So I think those are valuable things that we could contribute to the scientific community.
yeah. So we have one question. Somebody's raising a hand. Yes, Ryan Joseph Magsipok. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, good morning, Dr. Tuvilla. Good morning to everyone. I'm Ryan Magsipok, a third year chemistry student. And we also share the same roots, ma'am. I'm from Iloilo, so I'm in Nilonga as well. So my question would be, because I've quit on social media way before college because of all the my attention span has been worse levels and everything like that. So my question would be in the field of educational research, are there studies, especially longitudinal studies, specific to chemistry students on the effects of social media on their focus, attention span, or let's say in a positive way, does it promote meaningful learning much more? And to go deeper, does social media in a long-term setting, are there longitudinal studies pertaining to social media and social networking sites, its use to students pursuing higher education? So that's my question.
I think that's an awesome research topic that you have there. I am not aware of anything of that sort for the moment. So maybe that's something that like you could do. But I do know that there are Facebook groups out there that like they like these are student, I guess, student initiated Facebook groups, and it helps them with their studies. But I would say in the standpoint of ethics, because this is something I didn't discuss in my talk. Like, so in the US we have this institutional review board, which actually kind of before a research is approved, like before you are able to conduct research, you go through this ethics review board to kind of look at the ethics of how you are collecting data, how you are, how possibly your research could affect your participants, and like at the moment of data collection or in the future. So one thing that I see about that, like I said, I am not aware of any such study. One thing that could pose like an ethics issue is that how are you going to collect the data? You need to kind of ask permission from the web administrator, or like are you going to go collect that data, like letting them know, hey, I'm collecting like your files like from Facebook. So it's like it becomes now an ethics issue, and like that is something that I like, and like every country has their own, I guess, like rules how to go about this ethics issue. And I think that's kind of like my comment on that. Yeah, I'm sorry I
Thank
didn't really answer your question, but there are kind of studies about like attention span and whatnot, but I'm not aware of anything like particularly specific to chemistry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tuvilla. Thank you.
Okay, Alvin, do you have some question?
Okay, Doc Mav,
Um,
there's a question here.
Mavreen.
Okay, but do you
Yes, may I
will
just comment on
okay pa.
the ethics review? Thank you, Mavreen, for mentioning that, and for the students to learn that at the university, before you start your research, and if it involves human subjects or even animals, then you have to go through an ethics review board. You are not allowed to start any project, even though it's an undergraduate project, if you don't get any ethics approval board. So we do have that in place at the university. So I agree with Mavreen that if it involves, then there are issues pertaining to getting data from human subjects, even though it's in the social media. And there's also the data privacy law now implemented in the country. So before you conduct any research that would involve collecting data from humans and from the human subject, it has to go through approval of the Ethics Review Board, and it has to be in compliance with Data Privacy Act. So those things are very important. Otherwise, your research will just go down the drain and will not be accepted for any publications, or even starting that kind of research without any approval from the ethics. Thank you, Mavreen, for mentioning that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma'am Nanato, for commenting on that.
Doc Mav, I have a question here. So how do we deal or avoid instances of cheating during online exams? what are your thoughts on the use of lockdown browsers and how they affect the emotion of students? Any
Mm.
insights about this question?
Um, I don't know. Once again, I'm not the authority on that. Like that's beyond the scope of any kind of research that I've done. But I talk to students. I think that's the way, like educators can go about it, is to kind of involve their students in this kind of decision making. Like if you do kind of lockdown browsers, there must be a reasoning for that. But at least in the experiences of students that I have talked to, they don't really like that. Like, because they're like some things like could happen and then they're locked out and then they're not able to, I don't know, finish their tests or quizzes. And it's very stressful. I think partly kind of, I guess, I don't know if educators will necessarily agree with me. And like I said, this is like my own personal thoughts on the subject. I would say I think it's like a very disempowering thing to kind of like use this kind of like policing tool to kind of ensure, okay, like we're not going to, like, we're going to make sure that you don't cheat, so we're not going to allow you to use this kind of resources. I would say like there's a lot of debate in terms of like how assessments should go, but maybe like just a little push for professors is to maybe think beyond like the traditional way of how we're testing students, and like why, and kind of like delve into the question of like why are we testing students? Are we testing them to really demonstrate what they know? Are we testing them to kind of give us data about how to go about our teaching, and like, or to like to also give us formative feedback, like to improve our teaching, or like kind of like what is the purpose of those assessments? So I don't know, like maybe that's kind of like tangential to like a tangential answer, but like that's really just my stake on that.
Thank you very much for your insight, Doc. Another question
Okay.
regarding flipped classroom. So, do you have any insight or the effectiveness of flipped classroom in virtual setup?
I think flipped classrooms are amazing. That's just my personal stance, because if you actually do flipped classrooms and then like kind of have like the rest of the time for more student, like I guess student interactions, and just like more of exploring things that they've already, okay, they've seen this before and maybe they need more explanations. Like I don't know, I'm a fan of flip classroom. That's my personal take on that.
Thank you,
Okay.
Doc Mal.
So let's keep this informal, no? Students, you are free to participate. Again, when me and Mavreen had a preliminary discussion, no? I remember almost the same time. She said that she wants it as informal as possible, and it's like a coffee table discussion.
Mm-hmm,
That's
mm-hmm.
why I have here a cup of coffee. So I hope everyone has a coffee since we have an early webinar meeting today. So cheers to that. Also, tanong na yung mga iba.
Yeah, I mean, like I'd like to see your faces too, if possible.
Yeah,
It's
show your
like,
face.
yeah, that's actually one of the dilemmas like of online learning. You know, like if cameras are turned off, they don't really see the engagement that's happening. Like and that has been like kind of like a question right now, and one of the things that at Texas State is like kind of a problem, like in physics at least, we have this program called learning assistant. So this is more of a peer led instruction, where students who have already taken the class actually become like assistants to the instructors. So their role is to facilitate discussion amongst the students with like hard, like I guess harder content. So one of their dilemma is really like, how do I have my students turn on their cameras so we could actually do stuff together? So I don't know. I'm just like mentioning this, if like I hope that it helps you, because it has helped some of the LAs. Like they would actually work on a Google Doc where they could like be working together, or have some sort of material in front of them that they're working on together. So I guess it kind of forces people to actually collaborate with one another. So I mean, those are some of the tricks that the LAs have come up for themselves. And there's really something to be said about people um, coming up with their own solutions, because it's empowering. And then I guess you have more accountability when you're the one who's actually like, hey, I solved my own problem.
Okay. Oh.
I mean,
I would like to. I think I have a question here from Ma'am Christy Ramos, Dr. Ramos. Feel free to open your mic and video.
Hi, Mom. Miss
hello
Mavreen.
po.
Okay, hello. That you included in your introduction about misconceptions. Because I'm trying to wait for if you are going to discuss that in your talk. Is there a way of, because this is very important so that we can when we expound on our topics, no, probably we are working on false foundation in the students. Is there a way of knowing or detecting misconceptions that they learn no, before our subject? How do you do it?
Well, there are a lot of like research on that, and depending on like which topics that you want to work on, like there's a lot of research that actually like, okay, so that was really just like a survey on how like the kinds of things that they're doing. So I know there are a lot of focus on like kinetics and equilibrium and so on. So if I guess if you just like search it, they would have some sort of like instrument. Like a lot of them would usually well, this is, at least this is in physics. I work closely with physics educators, so that's why a lot of the things that I kind of like have learned comes from the physics education realm. They actually give like some sort of concept exams to their students to kind of just like understand like, oh, where are my students are at. Other ways that I have seen people do is just do like while teaching, they just do like use clicker questions wherein they're basically getting like a poll out of the students as to like, here's like kind of like a problem, like kind of like to kind of get at what students I guess um, like foundations. So if you pose a question, you can kind of understand and gauge where your students are at before you even give their lesson. So it's, I guess it's similar to kind of like a pre-test, but it's really more like on the fly. Like for me, I'm a huge fan of responsive teaching. And when I say responsive teaching, like you're responding to it on the fly. It requires a lot more, I guess, um, preparation, because like you won't know what students are thinking until like you've taught that class so many times. There have been other ways where in a group of faculty actually observe one another, but not really as to the teaching, but really observing students thinking. So kind of eliciting like students thinking so the phenomena. One thing I have noted, like at least in literature, how science is usually taught is like an IRE pattern. And what is an IRE pattern? It basically means that the teacher inquires, and then the student responds, and then the teacher evaluates. So when you have that IRE pattern over and over, you may think like the students get it. But actually, when you delve down, and I have seen this in a lot of chem ed research as well, when they do these clinical interviews to kind of have students actually explain, for example, the process of like precipitation. Like, oh, this, we're seeing the macro. But when you try to delve as to like if they're actually understanding the mechanisms behind, there is there is very shallow understanding to that. So maybe exploring more as to like why do you think that, like kind of putting some like real world cases, I suppose, like the miscibility of like air or something, in terms of like when you have soap bubbles or stuff like that. So it's like something like that, you have like kind of a macroscopic view of. And I don't know, like maybe this is a tangential, but one thing really that chemistry students are struggling with is like we are kind of operating in like the macroscopic world, what we are observing, but we're actually kind of like making students make sub microscopic explanations because we want them to kind of what is the phenomena behind. And then to complicate matters, we are also trying to kind of have them talk in terms of symbolic. So that's why we have all of those notations. But in terms of kind of, I guess, like if we go back to meaningful learning, what we want to be is kind of being in like the center of that, where we have like this cohesive understanding of like the macroscopic, what we are easily observing, the submicroscopic, what we cannot really see with our naked eye but still have an understanding of, and the symbolic, with which how we notate things as chemists. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer.
Okay, but
No, no problem at all.
the point so it would help for every new topic to have some sort of a pretest just to know the foundation of the students, or if they know something about the topic to be discussed.
Yeah, I mean, like that's one way to go about it. There are other ways to go about it, maybe having them draw a concept diagram. Like that's
Okay.
a way to go about it too. Like have them like, okay, do a brain dump. Like what do you know about this subject? What do you know about this topic? And like why do you think that? So kind of like maybe digging a little deeper as to what, like you'll be surprised, like because then I think that's how you uncover I guess the misconceptions underlying, like we I think we all have that intuition, right? We have
Yeah.
this intuition because of the experiences that we've like we've lived through. But then kind of getting to that, I guess that's like, I guess that the challenge for us to kind of like how do we dig deep enough that we expose those like misconceptions. Like just like I don't know, the thing that comes to my mind is like um about like the waxing and waning of the moon. Why does that happen? Like what is the reason for that, or like stuff like that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Christy.
Thank you.
Okay, medyo ano muna tayo. Popause muna tayo ng sandali. Shout out muna tayo sa ating mga webinar team. Thank you, Aldrin, Chris, Melvir, Alan, Doc Alan, and sino pa ba? Open video ko yung mga iba para ano. So these are my webinar team. Very efficient as always. No? So shout out then sa 1Chem, 2Chem, and 3Chem. Hello everyone. And also to the faculty members of the Department of Chemistry, the College of Science participants, faculty members, Dean, Papa, and the rest of the Execom who are here. Sino pa ba? And shout out sa mga nanonood sa FB page.
Wow.
Okay. Any other
I have a
question?
question here. So
Go ahead.
Mav, do you have some suggestion or insights on how to perform laboratory setup experiment at home, or even perform chem ed research using this kind of setup?
Well, I think I sent you some, Aldrin. I sent you some of those kitchen chemistry things that
Yes.
they're doing. So I mean, like that's a way to go about it. Like I don't know. I'm a fan of kitchen chemistry because it amuses, like it amused my K through 12 students a whole lot when I was teaching chemistry. And then there's a lot like food chemistry is also one way to go about it because you're already there, like you're sourdough baking and whatnot. So like that's one way to go. There are also a lot of like free simulations out there that are available that you can make use of. So maybe not just like when we talk about labs. Um, I've also seen some people use social media fairly like so there's this badging process as to how to I guess ensure that students have certain skills. And how we did it in Purdue before is that this was a project by Dr. Marcy Towns, was to like how to use I guess glassware. So the students were actually asked like how do you make certain solutions and do dilution, and you have to like really perform. And then partners like I guess like lab partners would take videos of one another, then send it to like, and then as they're doing that, they're actually asked to kind of explain what they're doing. So it's like, okay, I'm going to dilute it to the mark, and then I'm like saying the meniscus, and I like, so like a step by step know how. Like I know, like kids these days have TikTok and whatnot. There is one, I guess, technology that I would like to kind of advocate for. It's called Flipgrid. If you have a Google account, it's free. So like, um, especially right now with like everyone is in virtual learning, you can make use of this, to use Flipgrid, which allows students to make, I guess, videos of themselves. So you can even have like students answering one another through discussion boards wherein students are posting videos of themselves. So that's one way to go about it. What else? Maybe having students do some project-based learning, like where or like that requires some preparation, but there are also a lot of pre-made materials out there. There's the national, um, I think it's National Case Studies in Teaching group. I have like some links to that. Like I could share that later on if anyone wants to look at how to do like some sort of case studies in their classroom. Like, so these are like, I guess, project-based learning wherein you basically go through like some sort of exploratory project, maybe using your own like kitchen items and whatnot. So yeah.
Okay. Other questions or some comments? No? Questions and comments is very much welcome. Okay. Students, hello. I don't know. This might be a silly question, Mavreen.
There are no silly
Uh,
questions.
can I do some research about ito nga, yung regarding the lockdown, the responders lockdown? Can I make a research on responders lockdown without any having a test subject or human test subject para walang ethical clearance na kailangan. Is that possible?
What would be your research question and what would be your objectives? I think that's
Y-
the question I would pose. Like people have done like, I guess, like autoethnographies and whatnot, but then in terms of like being pragmatic about it, like who would be the audience if you start to go do a research like that? Like I guess like I would just boil down to what would be your research questions are. Like
Okay.
for like in terms of I don't know, like because like I said, like the ethical review board have like they, each institution would have their own kind of sets of rules and whatnot, but at least from my understanding, in US context, like if for example you give like tests to students, and that is part of like the purview of your, it's not extra to what else you're doing. You probably can do something like that when you're just like dealing with like, I guess, documents, if that makes sense. You're dealing with like documents, so you're technically just analyzing documents and not
Uh-huh.
human subjects, if that makes sense. So that is some that could be an avenue to explore. But then when you, like, the pandemic, I think is like a, I guess, a um sensitive
Yeah.
topic. So I
Yeah.
would like, I would exercise a lot of caution in that, because like, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of notification that this content contains about the COVID related topics, ganun. And then there's like a warning, if you are sure to post it or like to post it in the social
Mhm.
media. There's like sometimes I notice that there is like a warning
um
because I think it's maybe sensitive. Yeah.
some of the, I think I thought this was interesting research, which was a combination of both quant and qual methods. Our university conducted a survey actually with not just like kind of numbers question, but actually free response questions, wherein participants were able to kind of like I guess like talk about more about their experiences. And the focus was first generation students. And first generation students, at least in my university, is a big population. And when we say first generation students, these are students who are the first in their family to ever get to college. And so in like this research that was done by our university, they wanted to ask how COVID has affected students. So they asked them questions such as, do you have technological access at home? Like who is your like who is supporting you? Like what are your responsibilities? Because students, like at least like from the results of the study, they saw they some a lot of them were like, no, I don't really have support, I'm the one supporting my family. Or they would have things like, oh, there's limited, like, I have faulty internet, or I don't have a laptop. So it's like, then how can the university address that? So in that case, those are the kind of like research you're doing, but it still involves like students, because otherwise, like, how would you kind of collect that data?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it is possible that it may not involve a student or a test subject at all, and it will just come out just like a review paper
Well,
or
there will
review.
be like, you could always do like a lit review, but that's like oh, there are people who've also done some sort of so like meta analysis of like papers. So they do like look at, like, just go through a lot of papers and kind of see what comes up. I've also seen people do kind of like, I guess, data mining in terms of like the proximity of words. I've seen it a lot, like for example, when I was doing my lit review for my work with resettled Burmese refugee youth, there were studies that looked at newspapers. How do journalists portray refugees when they talk about it in like on like when they basically write about them? And some of their findings, for example, is like, oh, like some journalists, the in terms of the proximity of the words, like there's always, oh, the deluge, so it's like always kind of compared to some weather phenomena that's like unprecedented. So there's also this association of like, oh, the criminalization basically of refugees, because there's always that attachment to, like, when you put it like in the news. So that has contributed to, and also this kind of like, oh, when you think about refugee, you start to think about like really deficit kind of looking images as to like, oh, like this starving groups of people, or a lot of people like who are homeless or something like that. So it's like that kind of contributes to the narrative. So there have been like work that has done that. So looking at like maybe newspaper articles or images that are generated and so on. So that's kind of a like a document analysis of sorts that does not involve human subjects.
Okay, we
Thank
have
you so
question
much.
here, Chair, from Jeremiah.
Yeah,
Hello, good
open
morning.
open your video, Jeremiah, so that we could see
And
you. Yeah, thanks.
Hi.
hi, good morning po to everyone and to Doc Mav. I'm Jeremiah Africa, a third year BS chemistry student, no, and um, I have a question, no. Since we are in quarantine, education has been very challenging both for the students and the teachers because
Mm-hmm.
of the online and remote learning setup, which in
Mm-hmm.
turn have affected the interest of students towards learning. Now,
Mm-hmm.
can you suggest any method or way to improve or to rekindle the students' interest towards learning, especially in this remote learning setup? Like, for example, are game-based learning a possible solution to this challenge, or are there any more effective methods?
I mean, I think that's an awesome suggestion to gamify things. Like, people are trying to kind of entertain themselves. So, like, that is definitely one way. One thing that I have learned from like interacting with students, a lot of students are actually very lonely. So maybe offering some informal like sessions, like, hey, just like to hang out, and maybe if you like, I really am a fan of like peer-led instruction, wherein you have students kind of like hanging out with students and like at the same time like doing some like learning goals. At the physics with the physics department that I work with, they created this I don't know if you're aware of an online app called Gather Town. So what it looks like, you have like a virtual space wherein you have like Mario brother looking characters of yourselves, and then like at least like one of the professors I work with, she actually designed this Gather Town space to look like the actual physics study lounge, so it looks like that. And so when you go in through this kind of virtual settings, it's as if you were there, and then there's like some bulletin board that you could like work on your problems and whatnot. So I mean, like I guess making the most of like the technology that is out there is one way. I mean, there are a lot of like apps that have been designed to address like you said, but I think the number one thing that has kind of like affected student is really the, I guess, the loss of like engagement with one another, like in terms of like, you know, you lose out a whole lot. Like I'm really a proponent of like multimodal, like I guess like the multimodality. So there's a lot of things that are filtered out because we don't see each other face to face. Kind of like when we communicate with other, you can see my hand gestures and whatnot. You can see like where I'm looking at. I think one of the things that makes it hard is that if I have a screen here and I'm looking here and I'm not really not looking at you, we're not really making, I guess, like eye contact or something like that. And then I think it becomes harder for educators to kind of see like a lot of educators talk about that spark that they see when their students learn something. It's really hard, like, you know, like you see like just blank screens. So maybe normalizing the idea that hey, maybe everyone should like open like their like, I guess there, I know there's also like reasons why people choose to kind of turn off their camera, and of course those are legit reasons. But maybe encouraging that and normalizing like, hey, maybe we should like kind of like see each other eye to eye, and maybe doing like something together, or yeah, something like that. Like yeah, I think the main thing for me is really about how to engage students in like this pandemic. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
That's actually a very good research topic to start with. Don't you agree, Mavreen?
Sure, sure. Everyone, yeah, that is something that could definitely be explored, and like the implications of
Yeah,
that would be actually like pretty epic. Like when you think about it, like, um, yeah, I would be interested to know. I would love to read that paper that talks about that.
especially
Yeah.
those students and researchers who are tech savvy and knows more about computer graphics. Like you mentioned about Super Mario, putting
Mm-hmm.
like your Super Mario image. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of application that will convert your picture into like a pixelated image or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a cartoon image, and that would be very good, as if you're like inside a virtual environment. Yeah,
I
that
think
would be nice.
one thing too that I know has helped some students is that this pandemic has affected everyone, and so we have to be mindful of like how it's affecting students. Like we also try to do this kind of trauma informed instruction, and what that means is that really being mindful of what students are going through. So there was this like at least in the fall semester, the students were like really like very very stressed, like, you know, the pandemic is happening. And but there are some professors that I guess forget that we're still in a pandemic and still would expect the same amount of work from the students as if we're not in a pandemic. And I think that is something that is like unjust to learning as well. So one of the things that at least the my one of the faculty members that I work with has done, she actually um, took some of like I guess tried to remove some of the things that she usually teaches in like a normal semester, and just like really kind of like bore down and said, what are my main objectives, like what are the most fundamental things that my students have to learn. And so she pared down her curriculum like to be able to do that, because she's aware that like students are struggling. I've also like from one of my conversations, and she is actually a high school chemistry teacher. One of the things that she does in her classroom was when the students do group work, she emphasizes working with a group more than their output, because she thinks, if my students work 5 problems, it doesn't make a difference if they work like 10 problems of like kind of the same, I guess, same content. Otherwise, that's just busy work. And like, what are they really learning if I keep giving them busy work? But how she approached it is actually have students put more value in terms of collaboration. Because when students are collaborating, the students teaching the other student actually is learning a whole lot more. And then there's a lot of insight, because students are understanding what the other students are like kind of getting from the content, and so they're able to address, I guess, like, and help one another in terms of their learning. I see a question here by Ma'am Melfe Bungihan.
Yeah.
So classroom-based action research, oh, that's fantastic, but it has become a virtual classroom. That is a very hard question. Like, can you tell me more about what you're trying to do in your classrooms before? If you could give me a
Hi,
little
Okay.
ma'am.
detail. Hello.
Before,
Open video.
sorry po. Oh, hina kasi ng internet namin. Um, Hi, Ma'am Mavreen. For
Hello
most
po.
of the research you have shown a while ago, I've been doing that for the past 20 years
That's
with my
awesome.
students, of course. But we do classroom-based action research, small researches, but we have not published so far. Only a few of the work we have published.
Mhm.
So example of a classroom-based action research is when we do interventions in our classrooms. One of which is the Pomodoro technique, wherein we have the pieces of a tomato, something like that, in my classroom. So when you are in the classroom, you can actually look into, you can gather the results, right? You can observe the students. But now that we are doing it virtually, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to incorporate CBAR in virtual classrooms. So, yun yung problema ko ngayon.
I mean, I don't know if this helps bridge your problem. So you're having students work together in small groups.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's hard to capture all of that. Like maybe I know this because we've asked students to do this. Like using the Zoom breakout rooms and having students record themselves as they interact with one another could be a way. So what you will end up is having video data that we will then
Video
later on,
data.
we will then later on, like, I guess, analyze. But I mean, I have never tried that. Like, I've only seen some, because this may be tangential to like what you're doing. Like we I actually did a professional development for faculty, wherein they were asked to observe one another. Now, this would have been easier if they actually just went to the classroom and like went through this observation protocol, because there are like protocols that are available, and there's even like an automated app where you are like clicking things as things are happening in the classroom. So how the faculty did that, because they're like, no, I can't go to your classroom. So what the faculty did was record themselves in Zoom and then ask the students when they're broken into breakout rooms. I don't know how well you all use the breakout room feature of Zoom to kind of put them in discussion groups, in smaller discussion groups. But I have seen professors do that and then they record themselves and record the discussion happening in the group and then like put it all together later on. Like I can imagine maybe something like that while you're in a virtual space. But like
And that
yeah,
would
once again, like what Ma'am Nonato like pointed out, like that is also like
privacy data.
yeah, so that is something that has to be I guess taken into account. When I did my work with the resettled Burmese refugee youth, we we were we were actually recording their interactions, and that was in a classroom space. But there was another thing that we actually recorded, and this was one of the things that I like, one of the, I guess, the cool findings in my research, because I had screencast videos. So there's a way that you could actually capture what students are seeing in their screens. So we recorded that when they were having discussions. So you can actually hear what students are talking about in their discussions. You are also seeing what they're seeing in the screen. And so from that, it was easy for me when I was analyzing data, like some of the resources that they were like using. So I think someone asked earlier some of the cool findings. One of the finding that surprised me was this: when so these are English language learners, and then sometimes when you try to look for things in Google, and then they try to like find a Burmese translation for that, and it doesn't make sense to them, because like the it was not just like the Burmese like the Burmese language that they were speaking. They actually spoke like a very different like ethnic languages. So it's like, you know, if we're in the Philippines, they didn't speak Tagalog, they spoke like, for example, like Hiligaynon or something. And so they would, what they did actually, and I thought this was fascinating, when the definitions did not make a whole lot of sense, they switched to images. They clicked on images and looked at the pictures, which for me, when I saw that, I was like, oh, I never would have thought of that. To actually, like, when you're trying to make sense of things, to actually look at images. So those are some of the things that we found only because we had the data of what they're seeing on screen. So maybe something like that. But yeah. But then again, I'm biased to video data. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So,
Yeah, thank you, Ma'am
any
Mavreen.
other?
There is a question here. Okay.
Okay,
There's a
go ahead.
long question
From
in
an,
the chat
Are
box
okay.
by Dane Briones.
What are your thoughts on the effect of technological gaps on the learning of students in the context of online learning, especially in this pandemic? Because an apparent problem that some might be aware of is that in terms of online learning, we do not all have the latest technology to take advantage of for use in the online setup, which might have an effect on the learning of students as well. What would be a good alternative to level the playing field for students that might be struggling with this to help them learn just as much as others? That's very good insight. Um, I would say there are a lot of ways people have tried to address this, and I cannot like really comment on which one is more effective and which one is not, because like this pandemic is all, I guess, new to us. Um, in terms of technological gaps, I think um, I think one constraint that I can see is like the resources, right? But maybe in terms of online learning, having a way to kind of like um, so we have the learning management system, which is like, at least in the US, like, which is Canvas. So that's one way where professors put their class materials. The like this University of Santo Tomas have something similar. I'm not like aware what this is why context matters. I'm not aware what universities of Santo Tomas have or don't have. Um, but like maybe having like even like a Google Drive in terms of like latest technology. I know that at least our university has had a program to loan like laptops to students so that they could like use that. So I don't know how I guess um, interactive like the local government would be, but this is like more like, you know, a collaborative effort with everyone, because you obviously you do need resources. These are just some of my thoughts, and I don't know what is possible and what is not possible, but like maybe having like um, a program to kind of loan out like all of the technology that students like a kind of a loan program of like, hey, for this semester you're enrolled in this class, you can like borrow this laptop from like the government or something like that. That's one way, I guess, to do that in terms of like leveling the playing field. I've also seen like at least in Mexico when they tried to deliver this, and they are very well aware that some of their students do not have internet access, they use the television. So like, I mean, everyone has a television, so they actually delivered learning through that. I'm not sure though like what the effects of that are, but that is something that they tried. So they actually like um broadcasted that. um like in terms of like a lot of people have also like done sort of like like YouTube channels wherein they um like they offer like a lot of like content out there, I suppose. um yeah, so I don't know, those are some of my thoughts, but wow, this is very hard question, and I'm sorry if I'm not super helpful about it, but yeah, those are some
Mhm.
of my thoughts.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Marvin. Any final remarks, Marvin, that you could share to the faculty members who are doing or who wants to do chem ed research in the future?
Yeah, I think I will go back to kind of the basics. And really the basics is like what is most useful for you in your classroom. I think for me kind of like that boils down to it, because if faculty actually kind of like just sit down and assess what is most useful to them, maybe they will find like some inspiration that would spark like a research project. Like listening to our students, I'm really like strongly advocating for that, because our students actually teach us a lot of things. Like, and I'm really a strong proponent of like student centered learning, so that like yeah, so kind of just I guess a little bit of idea of what my current research is doing. And this is like from listening to students that I got some of these thoughts. So we had focus group interviews with students, and we kind of asked them how they felt like they belonged in their classrooms, what things their professors could do better, and so on. And we got really interesting insights as to like kind of and the things that students appreciated about their professors. So like that in itself could be a research question. Like maybe you can ask your students to kind of like see how they would restructure a classroom, like just posing to them a question, how do you envision like an ideal learning experience for you? And like it could be super informal. Like actually that's how I got started in terms of my education research journey. I just started giving my students like small quizlets to kind of like say like, how do you learn best? Like getting to know my students really, I think, was the best course of action for me to kind of like find out more how my message is being received by students, and how like what they are getting from me, and like to better understand how to improve my own teaching. And as for students, I think my kind of, I guess, final words are to kind of like advocate for yourself. Like I know that your instructors would really want like they want to give their best to you, but you also have to kind of help them help you. So maybe advocating for yourselves more is like, you know, Sir Darm, this is how I learn better. Maybe you can try this or something, or like kind of like showing like initiative as to like getting to know your professors better as well. Like, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Marvin. And this is not the last time that we're going to have you. Expect several webinar series on different
I have to say
topics.
though, this may be I okay. I actually have resigned from my position at Texas State,
Uh-huh.
and I am transitioning to a position at the National Institutes of Health. So I will be moving
Uh-huh.
to Maryland soon. So I'm not gonna be in academia, I suppose. I will be working
Okay.
at the Office of Research for Women's Health. So it's kind of like a different
Yeah.
I'm doing a different thing. So yeah, so that's all I'm saying. But I will still
Okay.
be involved with some of the research that we're doing at Texas State, such as like we're working with faculty, and yeah.
Mhm. Okay, that's good to know. So before we have the we'll have the award of certificate, let's have a photo op first before we proceed. Kindly turn on your cam and join us with Mavreen for a picture taking,
Okay.
students, faculty, and guests.
So we
So
have four,
team
three.
webinar
So we have
takeover.
three. Okay. So I'll start. So one, two, three, say cheek. Smile. Okay, first pan. Okay, next. One, two, three. Okay, last. One, two. Okay. So we're done with the picture taking. So awarding of certificate.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So we would like to give Mavreen a certificate of appreciation. Uh, so the University of Santo Tomas, Department of Chemistry, College of Science extends gratitude to Mavreen Rose S. Tuvilla, PhD, postdoctoral researcher, Texas State University, for sharing her expertise and time as speaker on the talk on a brief overview on history and possibilities of chemistry education research at the webinar organized by the UST Department of Chemistry on the 23rd day of April 2021 at the University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines. Signed, yours truly, Associate Professor Dharmato Brahula B. Albano, Chair, Department of Chemistry, College of Science, University of Santo Tomas, and the Dean of the College of Science, Professor Raydon S. Papa, PhD. Thank you so much, Mavreen, for your time. Uh, we
Thank you
really
so much.
appreciate.
I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Here we have an
We really
evaluation
appreciate.
po.
Yeah. So we will have evaluation for this webinar. Kindly scan the QR code, which is very popular now. QR code, scan, and you receive a certificate of attendance. And this is actually like a international webinar because we are broadcasted through the FB, and also our speaker is from the US. Thank you so much for everyone who are attending, who attend the webinar of the Department of Chemistry.
Thank you.
Plugging lang, meron pa tayong webinar tomorrow on lab safety by Dr. Neil Concebido. Okay? So with that, thank you, and we hope everyone good health and keep safe always. Okay. As a closing remarks, uh, this is not the last time that we're going to have a webinar on chemistry education. We will try our best to deliver more webinar on chemistry education, on maybe on different topics in the future. I'm glad that to hear that we can do chemistry education research with or without test subjects, which involves students, or if we want to avoid ethical clearance, we can do meta-analysis. Is that correct, Mavreen? And like a review, okay, and probably a development of a platform or a classroom environment for students. So thank you so much, everyone who attended the webinar, and God bless to all. Okay, so Aldrin, take away. So we'll have the UST hymn. Are we ready for the UST hymn?
We don't have UST hymn po.
Okay. So since may webinar pa naman tayo no, later on, so I think this will do na. So thank you so much, Marvin, and everyone who attended the webinar. Okay,
Thank you,
keep
Mav.
safe.
Keep safe, everyone.